See my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this it was a UMEC funded project where we were trying to understand how residents in Baltimore City access grocery stores and then looking at accessibility based on residential location. So a bit of an introduction. Of course, everyone's familiar with what a food desert is or a food insecure area, depending on the nomenclature. But it's an area in which it is difficult to buy affordable, high quality, fresh food. And so there's been a lot of work that's been done on food deserts across different disciplines. So of course we know that there tend to be fewer high quality stores located in lower income areas. And of course this requires residents to have to travel longer distances to access fresh food. There's fewer options in lower income neighborhoods, which often results in a reliance on convenience stores for foods. And at these locations, they tend to be higher cost items than what you would find in your supermarkets. And this is not just an urban issue. A lot of these same things we see in rural areas where they are limited number of stores, and they may also be limited in the type of stores available to residents. And so we see that for chain stores, the price of items are usually from 10 to 40% less than what you would find in non-chain stores, such as your convenience stores. And of course, these have a much higher quality of food items. And so the long-term impact of this really comes into when you look at health disparities, and research has shown that there is high obesity rates linked to living in an area that is food insecure, or that is a food desert. And so what this study is really looking at is how accessibility to grocery stores and access to grocery stores. And so we did that through a survey of over 500 residents in Baltimore City to see how they choose which store to go to, their mode choice decisions when going to the store, to better understand accessibility to grocery stores. And so one of the things that kind of first motivated this project was just looking at various food desert metrics. And what we found, of course, is that largely they are based on some sort of income threshold, some distance threshold to the nearest supermarket, and then vehicle ownership is often used as well, looking at the rate of vehicle ownership in a particular region. So for this study, I was looking at three main definitions throughout this. Two were national in scope, the USDA, and then the limited supermarket access definition, which comes from the reinvestment fund. And then at the local level, Baltimore City has developed their own food desert metric in partnership with Johns Hopkins University. And so here I just want to show the region in Baltimore City that is denoted as a food desert depending on the metric that is being used. So first we have the USDA metric, and I'm showing the half-mile definition. And so for this one, residents who are both low income and low access are considered a food desert, where income is measured either as a census tract with a poverty rate greater than or equal to 20%, or a median income less than 80% of the statewide median or the metropolitan median income. So you can see those numbers provided to you there. And then at least 500 people, or a third of the population, are more than a half mile from a grocery store for the half-mile definition, or 1 mile from the grocery store for the 1 mile definition. And then USDA also has a third definition that's based on vehicle access, where at least 100 households are more than half a mile from the nearest supermarket and they do not have access to a vehicle. So here you can see in orange the area denoted by the USDA half-mile definition. It says much of Baltimore City is a food desert with the exception of the affluent central and eastern portions of the city. When you use 1 mile, it's a much more restrictive definition, and here you only see portions in South Baltimore and West Baltimore denoted as a food desert. And then lastly, we have for the USDA definition with vehicle access, the areas which are shown as a food desert. And so even just with the 3 definitions provided by USDA, you can see you get very different areas shown as food deserts. This next map is showing the one that's used by the city, which was developed in partnership with Johns Hopkins. One of the things that they do is they restrict it only to residential land use. So there must be areas that are residential land use. There's also a quality of food metric where anywhere where the average quality of food in the stores is less than 9.5. And the HFAI stands for Healthy Food Availability Index. And what it is an index that's created by going into the stores in a neighborhood, cataloging the type of items and the quantity of items that they have, and then developing a metric based on that. Most supermarkets are around an HFAI score of around 25, just to give you a bit of framing for that number. Income, so median income of the household less than 185% of the federal poverty level for a family of 4. And census tracts where 30% or more of the households do not have access to a vehicle. And that 30% was chosen because 30% is roughly the citywide average for number of households who don't have a vehicle. And then they also use a distance threshold of 1/4 mile. This was straight line or distance. So if you were more than 1/4 mile from the nearest supermarket. Then lastly, we have the limited supermarket access, or the LSA definition, and that's shown to you on the right. This one is, they use income, the median household income of a block group, and apologies for the typo, less than 120% of the median income for the metropolitan area. So their method was a little bit more complex. So what they did was they categorized into 7 groups based on population density and car ownership rates. And they found the average distance to the nearest grocery store for residents who fall in the higher income category, so 120% or higher from the median metropolitan income. And then they looked at what percent of the block group for that category had a distance that was less than that reference distance. And that person is what became the LSA score. And then they set a threshold, which I believe was 45%, and then use spatial clustering to denote the area that is a food desert using that metric. And so you see here, with these various measures, you get very different areas that is shown as a food desert, though there's definitely a lot of replication in the areas that are shown. And so this is what kind of motivated the study. And so not only do we want to understand how people are getting to and from the grocery store, but we wanted to see if there was a way of doing a data-driven approach to determining the geographic areas that we should denote as being food insecure. So for our study design, as I said, some of the questions we were looking at are what indicators or what factors best predict grocery accessibility? What modes of transport should be considered when evaluating grocery accessibility? So that 1/4 mile threshold or 1/2 mile threshold we see usually is in reference to walking distance. And then what is the role of alternative forms of transportation in access to grocery stores? And this third question was really motivated by the fact that in Baltimore, we see a lot of people being transported using hacks, which are informal, unlicensed taxis. So we were trying to get a better understanding of the role that they play as well in access to grocery stores. So we developed a survey. We disseminated the survey both online and in person at various grocery stores. We, of course, asked for socio-demographic and household data. We asked for what modes are available in their areas, which modes they take when going to the grocery store. We also asked for their home location, given as the nearest major intersection, and their preferred grocery store, meaning the grocery store that they go to most often, and then ask some questions about their grocery shopping habits. So as part of the survey, there was kind of 4 questions that looked at this idea of accessibility. One was, how often do they go to the grocery store? So given as frequency of trips per month. The number of different grocery stores they go to in a given month. One of the things with most of the food desert metrics is all about proximity to the nearest grocery store. So we really wanted to explore that angle some. Do they shop at the nearest grocery store? So we asked it, and we also calculated it ourselves using GIS. And then the quality of store using that Healthy Food Availability Index. So we collected over 573, 74 surveys. 300 or so were online. The remainder were in person at grocery stores. We were able to go to the grocery stores with the help of working closely with the Baltimore City Department of Planning and their food policy group. They provided some context to grocery stores, and to incentivize people to take the survey, we provided gift cards on the spot to those grocery stores. And that also incentivized the grocery store to allow us to be out front to collect those surveys. And then in addition, we interviewed 30 of those informal taxi drivers called hacks to understand both the driver and their customers. So when it was all said, we had about 515 usable responses. Some fell out due to not having certain information provided, such as zip code, or we were unable to geocode the location of their home location in their grocery stores that they preferred. Some had resided outside of Baltimore City, which was outside of our study area. And so that left about 515 responses, of which a little under 500, we knew both the location of their home and preferred grocery store. So here, this is just looking at the demographics of our sample, our study sample, and comparing it to the demographics of the city. They're largely pretty much in alignment with what we see in the city. Of course, this was looking at grocery shopping trips, so we did see a higher sampling of females over males, about 70-30 split. Racially, we're pretty well in alignment with what we see in Baltimore City. And education level, we probably had a little bit of a higher sampling of those who have up to a high school diploma or GED, but overall it was pretty close to the demographics of Baltimore City at large. And here you can see by employment status, household size, and your income distribution. So here we have the locations of the responses that we received. Some of them are, you may have residences on top of the dots because we asked for the major intersection for privacy. And so of the people who who responded to our survey, there was about 30% who lived in the Baltimore City, Johns Hopkins area, about 45% in the USDA area given by half a mile. I did not look at the 1 mile definition in the study because it was so limited in geographic area. As you see, only 6 were in USDA by 1 mile, and then 166 in the USDA definition by vehicle access. So for our study, we considered all grocery stores within Baltimore City as well as those 2 miles or less from the border of Baltimore City. Even though we're studying residents, we know, of course, people will shop across jurisdictions to go to the store. And then there was 4 other stores which were selected as preferred stores that were not originally a part of our study site that respondents selected, and those 2 were added to our study. So one of the things we did is we categorized grocery stores by various types. So discount grocery stores are your more affordable grocery stores, such as a Save-A-Lot. Your specialty grocery store would be like your Whole Foods that are a little bit more higher end. Then you have your regular supermarkets, which are shown in green. And then lastly, you have your superstores, which would be like your Walmarts that are shown, which usually aren't considered when doing food desert metrics, but we included it because we did see in our survey some people selected like Walmart as their preferred store of choice. And so here we're showing which grocery stores were the preferred store, and the larger the dot means more people selected that store as their preferred store. And if you view the pie chart, we see that over 60% chose your general supermarket, and about 10% in total chose what we're considering a non-grocery store for their primary store. So that would be like your big box stores, your convenience stores, your farmers markets. They were a small percentage, but not an insignificant part of our sample. One thing we wanted to look at is where people live as opposed to the store that they said was their preferred store. And so what these pictures are just showing is the grocery store shown with the red star, and then the dots are the residential locations of those who are shopping at that particular store. So you can see, for example, this person here is deciding to shop at Food Depot, even though there's definitely closer grocery stores to them. And you can see kind of like a lot of grocery stores do have this kind of neighborhood element, but people do travel a bit for the grocery store of interest. Here's looking at a few other grocery stores. Here is a very central store, the Save-A-Lot. You can see this buy right here in the northeast is really an area that doesn't have a lot of food options, grocery store options, and it serves residents along this Bel Air Road corridor. Then when you look at other stores like your affluent stores like Mom's is an organic market, you can see that people come from various parts of the city to go to this store, but they are largely coming from the more affluent central area of Baltimore. And then you can see here for Walmart, people who are traveling to Walmart are going for the variety of items there, and so you see they're dispersed across the city. So this is just summarizing some of the things we found in terms of people's grocery shopping habits. So about 40% of our sample shopped on the weekend. Part of that maybe when we went to the grocery stores. They took 2 to 4 trips per month on average and shopped at 2 to 3 different stores in a given month. They said that the main reasons for why they chose which store they usually go to, location and affordability were the 2 main reasons. And then 36% also mentioned produce selection and 26% meat selection. About half of our sample said that they do coordinate their shopping trips with their pay period or their paychecks. And about 30% said they coordinate with government assistance. And then we asked about if there was any dietary restrictions in their household. Most households had no type of dietary restrictions, but 9% of households mentioned they were either vegetarian or vegan. About 5% had lactose intolerance, and about 4% mentioned either diabetes or low sugar diets. So the next thing we were really interested in was kind of exploring transportation a bit more closely. And so we asked people to select all modes that they've taken in the last month when going to the grocery store, as well as which one they take the most often or is their primary mode of transport. And so you can see here that for all modes, about half of people said they've walked or biked. Most people, it was walk, as you can see, have walked to the grocery store at least once in that month. But only 22% would have considered it its primary mode would be walking. Over half, their primary mode of transport is driving their personal car. And then even those who don't drive their personal car, there's another 16% who still get to the grocery store by a vehicle, whether it be a taxi service, ride-hailing service such as Uber or Lyft, or a car-sharing service. And so what's interesting is even those who don't own a car, even 1/3 of them still get to or from the grocery store using an automobile, whether it be getting a ride, so a free service, or having to pay through some other option like a hack taxi or ride-hailing service. And so we asked them, well, what factors into your decision on what mode to take? Weather, 65% said weather was a factor. Half said the amount of groceries they were purchasing was a factor. And then other things such as physical or mental disabilities and having children or other dependents were factors. And as you can see, in terms of who in their household is accompanying them on their grocery trips, about 40% said that other adults in their household are going with them. About 16% are taking people who live in other households to the store. Of course, children, about 22%. Persons with mobility limitations, and you can see it was slightly higher actually for those without a vehicle. And then others had none that accompanied them. So we wanted to explore the hacks, our informal taxis. And so we interviewed 30 drivers in 2 different sets. And we found some information about the characteristics of the driver as well as their customer. So of the drivers, the majority of them were male, about 85%, and they were largely between the ages of 35 and 55. For 40%, this is their main occupation, and over half say they drive 5 or more days per week, and when they do drive, it'll be about 4 to 8 hours in a given day. So these drivers largely service areas that are near to their home, and about 33% say that they do take cash alternatives such as Cash App or Square Card, but this is still largely a cash-based economy. And these drivers do not necessarily drive with your ride-hailing or your TNC companies such as Uber and Lyft. The majority of them said they don't do it because of vehicle requirements or because of how much of the profits that they take from the driver. And so for the drivers said that most of their grocery store customers they get for the return trip from the grocery store. Only 4 out of the 13 drivers in the first set that we surveyed said that the majority of their grocery trips were round trip. They've noted that Friday and Saturday tend to be their busiest days and that the first week of the month is their busiest period. Their customers are largely female. They estimate it from 70 to 90%. And you can see that when they take these hacks, they're doing very large shopping trips and have anywhere from like 15 to 30 bags that they're getting at the grocery store. Most of their customers live within 10 minutes of the store. And the fare that they charge is varied, but it's roughly based on distance, where they'll charge around $5 to $10 one way, depending on the distance from the store to home. And one of the things that was really interesting that was noted was that they didn't really feel that services such as Uber and Lyft had a large impact on their business. Some people did say that they noticed it, but they said that they do more than what you see from your Ubers and Lyfts, and that they do provide a service to their customers. So they have regular customers, so they'll go to their home and pick them up. They'll help them with their bags. One person even noted that some of their elderly customers, they will actually get their grocery list and do the grocery shopping for them. So it seems a bit more personal than what you see when it comes to your or Uber and Lyft type services. We did ask questions about kind of this next wave in food, with being if they do any takeout services like your Uber Eats or your Grubhub services. Looking based on income, we still see a relatively high proportion have tried these services. We didn't ask about how often they use it, just if they've ever used any of these services. And so you can see there's not really any trends based on income for takeout services, as well as those who don't own a vehicle versus those that do. Slightly higher, those who don't own a vehicle have said they've taken takeout services. Next, we looked at grocery pickup services. So those are when you go to the grocery store and you just pick up the bag. Your groceries are already been picked for you. Largely not really used by too many people in general. Only about 10% of those we sampled said that they have ever used grocery pickup. We asked about meal delivery services, such as your Blue Aprons, where they deliver the meals to you, but not prepared, and then you have to prepare them yourself. And you can see that for meal prep, as you got towards your higher income area level, about 30% said that they have used those services. As you get to your lower income levels, less than 5% or so have used your meal prep services. And then lastly, we looked at grocery delivery. Grocery delivery, we see that roughly a little less than 20% have used grocery delivery. It goes up a little bit with income. And one of the things that was maybe somewhat surprising was we didn't see much difference between those who own a vehicle and those who do not when it comes to using grocery delivery services. All right, now we're going to look at those 4 measures of accessibility that I had talked about before. And these will be used to help determine a kind of new food desert measure based on the responses of our survey. And so if you remember, usually food desert measures look at distance, income, and vehicle ownership. So I really wanted to explore which of these factors came out in our model. So this was just looking at the averages based on the 4 food desert measures we were looking at. So you can see that, for Baltimore City, it's saying that if you live in a food desert, on average, you shop more often. But if you look at like the USDA measures, on average, those who live in a food desert shop less often. We looked at the number of stores and so forth. And we did do statistical analyses on these that I'll present at the end. And so what we wanted to do was to use CHAD decision trees, which determine which factors will best predict the dependent variable, which in this case will be our 4 measures of accessibility. And so we looked at 3 different models. The first model kind of looked at the traditional variables that we see in our food desert measures. So we looked at various income thresholds. So if the income was less than or greater than $20,000, $35,000, and so forth, if the household owned a vehicle, and if there was a grocery store within 25 miles, half mile, and 1 mile of home. Model 2 included the same variables we saw in Model 1, but it added some additional socioeconomic variables that we thought could play a part, such as education, household size, and employment status. And then Model 3 looked at the same variables once again in Model 1, but then added the variable that kind of looks more at choice, where we looked at the total number of stores available within a quarter, half, and 3 miles. So it's not just looking at like the nearest store, but how many stores do you have within certain distances. So one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to move away from using your Euclidean or straight line distance and moving towards using network distance for our metric. And what you can see here, this is at quarter, half, and 1 mile, just how much of the city kind of is overestimated when you use Euclidean distance as opposed to your network distance. So for example, at the 1 mile threshold, if you're using network distance, about 47% of the city has access to at least one grocery store. If you were using straight line distance, that number is at 83%. So I'm going to present the decision trees for each of our accessibility indicators. The first one was frequency to the grocery store. And for this one, all the models were the same. The only thing that predicted how often one goes to the store was actually income. And so what we found was in the first level of the tree was income less than 100,000 or greater than or equal to 100,000. Where those who were over 100,000 shopped a lot more often. And then the next threshold was at 20,000. So less than 20,000, they shopped about 3.6 times a month. More than 20,000, about 4.5 times per month. More than 100,000, about 6.1 times per month. And then this one is looking at the number of different grocery stores that they shop at per month. And once again, income was the only predictor, and it was at a threshold of 35,000. So you can see if you're over 35,000, you're more likely to shop at more stores in a given month. Next, we looked at the HFAI score, which is a proxy for quality of food at their preferred grocery store. And then once again, income was what was the significant factors. First, that income less than 20,000, they're shopping at stores of a lower quality. And then the next breakoff point is 75,000 if you're less than or greater than that. So you can see that as your income went up, the quality of the food on average was higher as well. And this was for Model 1, which used the vehicle access, income, distance to the nearest grocery store. Those were the factors that were considered, but only income was significant. So for quality, looking at Model 2, where we added the additional socioeconomic variables of education, household size, and unemployment, turned out that education actually was the better predictor of quality of store. And so essentially, if you had a college degree, you shopped at stores of higher quality than those who did not. And then the last model went back to looking at the traditional variables of Model 1 and then also looked at the total number of stores available within the region. And so this one, the first level was once again that income threshold of 20,000. But then the second level looked at the total number of stores available within 3 miles of home. And 3 miles was selected because we did look at the average distance from home to the preferred store. And most of them all fell within that 3 mile range. And so you can see the breakoff points. So those who only have less than 7 stores, their quality is a little bit less. Between 7 and 10, it's higher. And then in this bracket with the most accessibility, another income, the 50,000 threshold becomes important, where of course, if you're in a high accessibility and also in a high income bracket, you're going to shop at stores of higher quality. Next, we looked at shopping at the nearest grocery store. And so this was looking at if the store that they prefer to shop at is the one closest to their home. And the the only factor to that was if there was a store within a half a mile from home. So if there was a store within half a mile, they were more likely to shop at the nearest store than if it was not, which pretty much says if you're going to be driving, you have some choice and it doesn't make too much of a difference if you're going to your nearest store or not. And then we also looked at the nearest store by the type of store. So if it was a discount store, specialty store. And once again, we see the number of stores within a half mile. But then if you do have at least one store within a half mile, your income also played a part as well. And so those who had lower income were more likely to shop at the nearest store. And then this last one looked at Model 1 that plus the addition of the total number of stores within a certain area. And we can see half mile threshold once again. At those who had a store within a half mile, that 35,000 income, as we've seen before, was level 2. But for those who had no store within half a mile, it was looking at the number of stores you have available within 3 miles that was significant in terms of shopping at the nearest store. And then after that, having a store within 1 mile. And so how are we going to use these? So we wanted to kind of move towards predicting a food desert measure. So 2 common assumptions are people shop at the nearest store and their shopping trip originates from home. Shopping originating from home held, but we did find that 3/4 of our sample did not shop at the nearest store. And so this was just kind of recapping the results of the decision tree. And so we saw that there was various income thresholds that kind of came about in our model. We decided to use the 35,000 for our food desert measure because it was the only factor for the number of stores, and it also was a predictor of shopping at the nearest store. And so for our measure, what we found is really income was the dominant predictor. Of course, vehicle access and income are highly correlated. And so for ours, we used a median household income of a Black group less than 35,000, which you can see in this map. And we also followed Baltimore City and restricted to residential land use only. What we wanted to do is provide a prioritization, though, for where we should invest in terms of providing access to food. And so using the results of our analysis, we knew that that half-mile network distance from a grocery store was important in terms of if you shopped at the nearest grocery store, and that's shown here. And then we also looked at the total number of stores available to you. So the areas in purple have 11 or more stores available, in yellow, 8 to 10, and in green, 0 to 7. So we created this priority score where 1 is the highest priority, 4 is the lowest. And the 1 would be people who live in this area of green, that's denoted a food desert, and also do not have a store within a half-mile from them. And you can see the priority where number 4 is they live in this purple area and they have a grocery store within half a mile. That's a very low priority because they do have access to a store. So here is a comparison of our food desert measure to Baltimore City's. So for the new metric shown on the left, you can see the areas that we should prioritize are shown in dark red here, which are your South Baltimore, a little bit, and your areas that are outside of the city center. So you can see there is some overlap, but we also show some additional areas that should be considered for investment in terms of food and grocery stores. And so just to kind of close out, we did run some statistical tests to see if there was any statistical difference between those who, from our survey sample, that lived in the food desert versus those who did not, because the whole purpose of these metrics is to be able to identify geographic areas for investment. So a Mann-Whitney U-test was performed where we were looking at the difference in the means between those who live in and outside of a food desert. So for frequency of grocery store visits, only this new metric found a significant difference between those who lived inside and outside of a food desert. For number of stores visited, none of the metrics, including the new one, did. And then for quality, all of them did determine that those who live in a food desert shop at stores with lower quality, as you see here. And so in summary, we found that income was the most important predictor of access. Very low thresholds like 20,000 and very high thresholds of 100,000 show very different shopping patterns. We used 35,000 based on the decision tree analysis, which is much higher than what is currently being used. So the Baltimore definition is around 45,000 and the USDA is around 55,000. We've found that people value choice in grocery shopping, so they don't necessarily shop at the nearest store. So just because you have a store next to you may not mean that you have good access to stores, because it may be a store that you don't want to shop at due to price or due to quality of items and so forth. There's still a reliance on cars for grocery shopping. Even those who don't own a vehicle usually still at least use a vehicle for at least one direction of the trip. Hacks still play an important role in grocery access here in Baltimore. And other things such as your frequency of shopping, the quality of stores with which you're able to shop at, may be more important measures of accessibility than the distance to the nearest grocery store. Because people show that choice is important, and particularly if you're driving, you're willing to drive a couple minutes more to get to the store with which you prefer. So with that, I thank you, and I will take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Chavis.
All right.
Yeah, Dr. Chavis.
Yes, Dr. Saka.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. Now, one comment that I have, or a question, you had mentioned that basically the most significant variable that contributes to accessibility, contributes to the frequency of maybe shopping is income, right? Am I correct?
Correct.
Yes. So my question is obviously, there's a nexus between income and access to vehicle.
Of course.
So, so one will intuitively expect that maybe having access to vehicle will also encourage trip frequency. But it looks like your study is telling us otherwise. Am I correct?
I don't think it's necessarily telling you otherwise. They were very correlated. I didn't present the correlation, but it was extremely correlated between income and vehicle ownership. So I just think that was a stronger of the two factors. Yeah.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Chavis. Great presentation. I see a question in the chat box. Do you want to address that question?
Could you read it for me? I don't.
Why are people still hacking? Why aren't they using Uber, Lyft, etc.?
Okay, sure. So they're a little bit more affordable. Their price point is still lower than Uber and Lyft. And I think also there may be some generational differences too in terms of who takes hacks versus who takes Uber and Lyft. But I think the affordability is a big part. In terms of the grocery store, they're readily available, so you don't have to wait for the vehicle to come. If it's a Lyft or Uber, hacks, they're sitting and waiting at the grocery store, so it's a lot quicker. And then you tend to see the same hack drivers over and over, so you start to get to know them as well.
And the second question is, how do you think transportation network companies can improve their service delivery to customers?
Specific to grocery stores. So it's interesting. We've talked a little bit to some of the drivers of like Ubers and Lyft, and some of them actually don't really prefer to pick up from grocery stores. But in Baltimore, one of the things that they've done is they've actually did a partnership with Lyft, where they're offering subsidized rides to and from the grocery store for residents who live in sections of South Baltimore and West Baltimore. And these trips are now $2.50 one way to the grocery store. And so through a partnership that's been developed, those areas are now being served by Lyft. I don't know long term if that's going to be the most viable of options, but that's what they're doing right now to kind of fill the gap.